Hello, everybody. This is Heather Alderman again, back to talk to you about the annual reporting process for COSMA. I'm going to go back a little bit to talk about the philosophy of this accreditation process because one of the most important things is that not only is it outcomes-based and mission-driven, but it is developmental. So this means no one is expecting your program to be at some sort of a perfect spot or end place where you just happily reside and there's nothing for you to improve upon. The assumption is that there is constant change, constant adjustment to the market and to what's going on your campus. And so it is seen as a developmental process. In addition, this development is, of course, for those programs that may not already be doing outcomes assessment or just starting outcomes assessment. That's a process then to kind of get used to collecting that data and using it, et cetera. So the annual report is that yearly chance to provide data that you have collected and to analyze it and understand what it means and what you're going to do with it. So this is unfortunately a very wordy slide, but I really think that it has a lot of good information. And again, I want to focus on two of these elements that relate to the annual report. So you might wonder, why would self-assessment be a benefit of accreditation? Well, there may not be processes or procedures that your institution has where you actually get to sit back and reflect. And as you probably make your students do from time to time, that reflection is a type of learning and certainly can benefit everybody who does it. So that is one benefit of this process, is carving out that time, space, and giving some structure to that self-assessment. And of course, like this sort of developmentalness that comes with this process, there is an assumption of continuous improvement. And so we're always looking for you to be thinking about what your program is doing well, and then of course what is challenging and how you might improve that. And I really think this speaks to being able to bring in a lot of different programs into this process, and everyone can fit, because what we're really looking for is for you to tell us what you're doing, why you're doing it, what it means, and how you want to move forward. So that's the focus. So there is an annual cycle associated with this accreditation process. And so I'll give you a few of those details here. Every April, I send out a request for programs to pay their annual dues, but also to submit the annual report. And I do it that early because it's the end of the semester and a lot is going on. Graduation is happening, possibly maybe you're shifting into a summer cycle, but nothing is due until the end of July. The COSMA fiscal year mirrors most institutions' fiscal years, starting July 1st and ending June 30th. So, the dues, this gives you the chance to, if your budget is to have the dues happen prior to the end of your fiscal year, you can pay them then, or you can pay them when the new fiscal year begins, if that's where you're budgeted for the dues. So there's some flexibility there. I always keep copies of all of the annual reports that any program submits. And so if you need something from a previous year and you don't have it, or if you're new and perhaps you're the person doing this process before you didn't give you all the materials, I do have that. There is a bit of, I'm pretty flexible in many ways, but you have to submit your annual report. So we do have a process called administrative probation that can lead to other terrible things if you don't submit either your dues or your report or both. And then there is a fine associated with that. However, I always grant extensions if you need it. I just ask that you request them. Another thing for the accredited programs is that we have a requirement that comes from CHIA, which is the Council for Higher Education Accreditation. And that is a body that recognizes COSMA as a programmatic accreditor. We have to require of all of our accredited programs that student achievement data is available to the public on your website. So we ask that during this cycle, when you are reviewing your data, putting it together, that you then replenish your website with the new data. All right, to get back to the concept of continuous improvement, even if your program is not yet accredited, if you're in candidacy status, for example, you are collecting data with your outcomes assessment plan, maybe for the first time or second time, maybe after many years, but we want to see that. And also we're asking you a lot of questions in the annual report, which I'll go through very specifically, that gives us a sense of what changes or circumstances might have happened over the previous year. So the second bullet is referring to situations where a note is when you have been accredited, but you still need to submit some information to show compliance with a principal or more than one principal. And those are called notes. So there is an opportunity to demonstrate that you are in compliance with those notes within the annual report process. And also, if you're in candidacy status and you have been asked to respond to some changes in that plan, the outcomes assessment plan by the Board of Commissioners, you can also include that feedback that you're responding to. And it could be that things are not going to be in compliance if you don't respond, or it's maybe something optional to improve it, but that's your chance to respond to that. You also have 2 matrices you'll be completing, which has been reviewed in the session I did specifically about outcomes assessment, but you have a student learning outcomes matrix and an operational effectiveness goal matrix. And then there's a little bit of demographic data about graduation rates, transfer rates, just a few little bits of information called a program information profile. And I'll show you what that looks like as well. And then in general, you are providing any programmatic or administrative changes that have happened, and I'll enumerate upon that as well. And again, this is, I put this, the last bullet in just to reiterate, we have a deadline, please update your website, etc. All right, again, I'm saying this so many times because people do sometimes get lost in this deadline, but there are 3 parts to the annual report. And you fill it out, the sections out according to which stage of the process that you're in. And there are instructions on the front to let you know what that is. But if you're accredited, you're going to complete the whole thing. And if you're in candidacy status, you pretty much complete the whole thing. But if you're a program member who has not yet been granted candidacy status, you get a reprieve and you just do the first section. All right, I think I've said this a couple of times. Not to be threatening, but anyway, there are requirements here and we stick to them. All right, so the first part of the report is basic contact information. So the reason we would want to know this, of course, is if sometimes institutions actually change from colleges into universities, or the person who is the contact for COSMA has changed. And we also ask you submit information about who an alternate would be. So circumstances come up where people go on sabbatical or whatnot, and it's helpful for me to know who to contact. And then, of course, you have to identify what your accreditation status is, or your status with this organization. And then you're going to talk about if there are any programs that you have created, any degrees, anything that's been terminated. We have recently begun accrediting associate's degrees. So if that's something your institution provides, then you would indicate that as well. And then there are faculty who may have come and gone. We have provosts, presidents, deans, assistant deans, lots of administrators are, shift about here and there. And given that they are possibly the potential, the supporters of your program and of this process, we want to know if they've changed. And we ask you to talk about whether it has made an impact on your program or not. And it could be that you got a new dean and, the dean is really pro accreditation and everything is great. All right, the second section of the report is where you're going to analyze your outcomes assessment data. So one of the first areas here, and I referred to this before, is this is just this little chart where you would be able to write the note, let's say, or it depends on what stage you are in the process, an observation, which is not required to be responded to, but is something that could improve your program, and you could respond to an observation here. That is something that would come out of an accreditation decision. Action items, those refer to when you have had a site visit and you're not yet accredited, you could respond to these action items. These are areas that are not in compliance and similar to a note, but it's prior to a decision. And so you could write all of those in there. Your response could be, see Appendix A if you need to provide documentation, or it could be a narrative. It could be a link, so this is just a template here for you to use, but how you respond to it then is your option. So the next section here in section 2 of the report is to ask you what is the URL for where you are indicating your student achievement data. So the numbers of the pages of the document are of the matrices and the program information profile. That's what has to go up on your website. If you are super curious, which I don't know who is or not, but I've seen it, some programs put their entire annual report on the website, and that's their prerogative, but you don't have to do that. You just need to put these final sections, but include the URL. And so on our website, with all of the accredited programs, we have a list, and there are columns indicating the degree level. So associates, bachelor's, master's, doctoral. And so if the program has a degree, accredited degree in that area, you can click on it. You'll be taken directly to this URL. So we are updating this every year constantly. I'm checking it twice a year. So it should be up to date. And that's why also, especially, we want that information to be up to date for the public. This is just a little bit of a screenshot of what the student learning outcomes matrix looks like. So if you have already looked at the outcomes assessment template, then you know. And there's just an example here. It is not anything required. It is a sample. But this is the place that you would put all of this data. And this is the matrix that would be included on your website. And then you don't just present the data, of course. You have to talk about what does it mean? So even if you have met or exceeded your expectations, you should talk about, that means that everything we are doing is fantastic. Yay for us. Maybe it means something else to you. Maybe it means you actually need to raise your benchmark because your students, all of them are getting, or the bar that you set has been met or exceeded, and maybe you shifted a little bit more and trying to capture even more students who are meeting your expectations or exceeding them. Sometimes you may be unable or have difficulty gathering some data for a lot of reasons. And so this would be a time when you could discuss that. And we want to know whether any of the data is prompting you to consider making some shifts in your curriculum, either where some material might be presented or the number of times that it might be presented. And then we want to know, hey, was there anything that you did last year that you can report on that now you're seeing the data is showing that it worked or it didn't work, or you're seeing not necessarily any impact? How do you kind of close the loop on that data? So we want to have a narrative about this. This is the operational effectiveness goals matrix. It looks somewhat similar to the SLO matrix, but having the number of, you can have any number of operational effectiveness goals as you like. There will be spots for maybe more than you have or fewer than you have. So you just put in your own. Using some terminal data, such as graduation rates, or job placement rates can be really good measures for some types of OEGs like this graduation rate OEG. So up to you to decide what you want to measure, but this is what it looks like. And then you also will be writing a short narrative about what you've met, not met. Sometimes there are your outcome, your OEGs will be measures that you have to do for your institution. And so maybe the bar is very high, maybe it's not high, and you made it, but it may be something that's linked to something that you're already collecting for your institution, and that's fine. So you can talk about any limitations that may come up because of that. And here is the program information profile. So this directly comes from a CHIA recommendation of something that you could put on your website. So the way that we approach it is that you can, you don't have to answer or include the information from all of these indicators of effectiveness. You can decide what you want to include, and then it may be that your institution has a particular definition of graduation rates. Let's say, here's a 4 or 5 year, but let's say you like to collect data on 6 or 7 years, you can certainly include that. And if you don't have any data on job placement rates, then don't include it. That would be okay. So this is open to however you want to answer it. All right, so that's it. That is the report, although I know that many faculty may have negative feelings about me when it is due, because we are asking you to, provide some information. But if you need an extension because you're on a 10-month contract and you are not going to be working before July 31st, please request an extension. Or if the data that you collect or the institution's collecting that you're filtering from can't get you data in time, you can request an extension. So just the key there is to communicate with me so that you don't go on automatic administrative probation. And of course, don't wait until the last minute to put it together. If you are collecting data for some of your student learning outcomes or your operational effectiveness goals at some, various times of the year, just ensure that all the faculty in your department are aware of this and they can get the data, give it to you, or whatever your repository for this information is, that it's done along the way. That can really help you when you're finalizing everything. We do make changes to the document annually. During COVID, we were asking specific questions about the impact of COVID so we could understand better how to support everybody. And we certainly saw many instances where data was not able to be collected, especially in 2020. And no one got in trouble for this because all of us were under these circumstances. So you need to use the report that I provide to you, while very similar, may have some differences. And so the Board of Commissioners is looking at this document on an annual basis, and we might make some changes. So while you might be able to pull some information from a previous report, don't just send me a redo of last year's report, because I might send it back to you and ask you to resubmit it with the new, any new updates there are. Again, the website, I see that I've emphasized that perhaps too many times. And then, this process, how is it going? What I'd really like to hear, and I've heard mostly, some people do not have a comment about it, but others really would like it to be a little bit more streamlined, or maybe to have a different way to provide the information that is, say, online in some sort of Dropbox, Google Drive type of repository. So what I'd like to hear from anyone who has watched this far is, what we might do to help streamline this process. All right, and this is just what's coming up in the next couple of months. I guess I won't be doing any of these sessions for a few weeks, but in October, I have a few going on here. I've broken down some of this process, and really the big one that people want to know the most about, which is really helping them to then understand each of the principles, is that first one, writing the self-study document. So that's kind of a big and lengthy presentation, but very useful and helpful. And then the other side, once you've submitted that, you have to host a site visit team and have a site visit where your peers are asking you a lot of questions. So what goes into preparing for that, and what kinds of questions might you be asked to answer? And then just a little bit of a process session will be on October 27th, where I talk about what the board's decisions, you know, how do they make them? What do they look like? What's some of the wording, the terminology that we use, and how do you approach your reaffirmation of accreditation after you've been accredited once, and what does that look like? So that is what's coming up. And then you can see that there are some sessions here that have been recorded, and those you can always view on your own.